On behalf of the Historical Society of Harford County, welcome to this afternoon's presentation, Meet Thomas Hayes and His Neighbors. I'm Jackie Seneschal, your host for this brown bag lunch, and today we're traveling through Bel Air as Mr. Hayes knew it in the early 19th century. We're recording this event in advance and won't be able to take your questions live. If you would like to submit a question for our guest today, you may do so using the contact feature on the web page of the Historical Society of Harford County. At the beginning of your message, note that your question is about the Thomas Hayes event. This recording will be made available publicly through the Historical Society's webpage and on the Society's YouTube channel. Our guest today is Christopher T. Smithson, a native of Maryland who specializes in genealogy research in Harford County and northeastern Maryland. His interests include documentation retrieval, brick wall ancestor research, patriotic and hereditary lineage research, missing heirs research, and African American research. He currently serves as the registrar for the Maryland Society of the Sons of the American Revolution and as genealogist general of the Hereditary Order of the Signers of the Bush Declaration. He has authored 7 books and has been featured in the Journal of American Psychologist for solving the mystery of Little Albert. In 2019, Chris was presented with the Historic Preservation Recognition Award for excellent volunteer work in historic preservation by the Harbor of Grace chapter of the National Society of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Chris, welcome to our program. Take it away.
Thank you for having me. Should I get the mouse to work correctly? There we go. This afternoon, we're going to learn a little bit about Thomas Hayes and his neighbors. And the objective of this talk is as Thomas Hayes came to Bel Air and purchased what is today known as the Hayes House in 1813. This talk was based off of a plat that was generated from information compiled by the late Mrs. Elijah Rogers, based off her description of how Bel Air was laid out on Main Street in 1815. At that time, we had 27 buildings in town, including a courthouse and a jail. Thomas Archer Hayes, Sr., was born in 1780. In 1808, he was appointed by Governor Robert Wright as the quartermaster for the 40th Maryland Militia Regiment. And in 1817, by act of legislature, he was appointed commissioner and relocated the streets and boundaries of the town of Bel Air. He was also a farmer and a lawyer. He later died in August of 1861, and he was buried at Christ Episcopal Church, Rock Spring, at Forest Hill, Maryland. This is how Mr. Hayes's house would have looked similar in 1813 when he purchased this house. You have the stone structure on the one side, the main structure, wooden structure of the house. On your right, this house stood here from 1787 until 1957, roughly, when it went out of the Hayes family and later became occupied by the Historical Society and moved to its present location on Kenmore Avenue slightly thereafter. So it remained in the Hayes family for well over 100 years. When Mr. Hayes came to Bel Air after purchasing this house, he had several well known neighbors. One of his neighbors to his right, as we go south on Main Street, who owned lot number 35 and 36, was John Montgomery. John Montgomery was a U.S. Congressman, a mayor of Baltimore, member of the House of Representatives of the United States, member of the Maryland State House of Delegates, Attorney General, and for a period of time, and he died in Baltimore in 1828. His body was originally buried at the Methodist churchyard here in Bel Air, which I will speak after, and later moved to Mount Carmel Cemetery in Emerton, Maryland, uh, in the 1950s. Here we have a picture of John Montgomery, and a picture down there is a picture of his stone, which is today at Mount Carmel. As we walk across the street, um, directly across the street from where Mr. Montgomery lived, was Henry Dorsey. Henry Dorsey was a native of Anne Arundel County. In 1795, he married Elizabeth Smithson here in Harford County. They had one daughter who married Walter Fernandez, and they lived at the homestead slightly south of here, down South Main Street off of Linwood Avenue. Uh, they married in 1816. For nearly 50 years, Henry Dorsey was the clerk of the court for Harford County from 1801 to 1845. He died at the homestead here in Bel Air, and also in 1846, his wife Elizabeth Smithson also passed away, and they were then taken to Greenmount Cemetery in Baltimore and laid there. And today there's nearly 6 generations of the family buried in the same plot. The house that Henry Dorsey owned is what is today known as the Van Bibber House. This house is at the corner of uh, Main Street and Fulford Avenue. On the left, you will see the front of the house, which faces Main Street. On the upper right is the back part of the house, which is off of Fulford Avenue. And the bottom right-hand side is a exterior building, which was in the rear of the house, separate from the house. As we walk back across the street on the same side that Mr. Hayes lived, which is at the corner of Main Street and uh, I'm sorry, Fulford Extended, was where Gilbert Jones had his inn, which was lot number 16. This was, uh, let's see, this was under the same as the Union Tavern, later owned by Thomas Hayes, who actually married Gilbert Jones's daughter. Later served John Montgomery served as the manager of this building in 1821. Later the postmaster and the editor as an independent citizen. In 1829, S.B. Hugo had a house here, followed by James Knight and later Charles Bolden up until 1855. The house that was there was James Brummel's house, which is the site of where James, where Gilbert Jones's Inn was, as well as the Connor house was the same house, and later this building was demolished to build the Equitable Trust building, uh, which you see today. As we walk across the street from where Gilbert Jones had his inn, was Mrs. Cloud's school, which was lot number 32. According to Mrs. Rogers, Mrs. Cloud was a Quaker lady. Her school was then called what was called the Fulford House and present of the SunTrust Bank. Uh, in 1815, uh, students studied there, also learned needlework and painting. Mrs. Cloud was a widow from Newark, New Jersey. She had three daughters that ran the school in aid of Mrs. Young and Mrs. Hegel, and later that lady was Mrs. Matthew Cairns. Nothing further is known about Mrs. Cloud's family or how long she stayed after that here in Bel Air. Um, and that was there across the street from Gilbert Jones's Inn and across the street from right next to where Henry Dorsey had lived. The next lot was lot number 31. That was directly to next to uh, Mrs. Cloud's school was the residence of Benjamin Hudson and John Rockhold. What is known about this residence is that in 1820, 5 years after this plat was done, uh, was there was an equity case involving the Rockhold family and Thomas Hayes. Eventually, the house went into mortgage and the property went out of the Rockhold family and later became property of Mr. Hayes later on after this court case was handled. There's no pictures of this building that we are currently aware of. The next house, as you walk down the street on the same side, is what was then Samuel Richardson's residence, lot number 30. Samuel Richardson was a major in the 40th Maryland Militia during the War of 1812, as well as the Register of Wills of Harford County from 1813 to 1818. This house was later demolished to build the uh, Century Building on South Main Street and Churchville Roads. The next building that you come to on the same side of the street is Israel David Malsby's residence, lot number 29. Israel Malsby was born in 1780. He married Jane Hall. They had the following children: William, David, Sarah, and Harriet. Three of the children married uh, and had many descendants that are throughout uh, the history of the county. He also served in the 40th Maryland Militia during the War of 1812 and died in 1839 and was buried at the Christ Episcopal Cemetery in Forest Hill, the same interment as Thomas Hayes. As we continue down the street across from Mr. Richardson's home was the doctor's office of Dr. Scott. Nothing is known else about this lot except it was Dr. Scott's office, lot number 14. There's no pictures of this residence or identifying which Dr. Scott that they were referring to. Next to Dr. Scott's office was the residence of Jason Moore. He owned lot number 13 and lot number 25. These lots were not next to each other. Lot number 13 was next to Dr. Scott's house, and lot number 25 was further down the street, which was between the Bradford's residence and Stephen Jones's Inn, which is across the street near what is today the sheriff's office, within three two buildings of what today is the sheriff's office. Jason Moore owned a 31 and a half foot one-story frame house. There's no pictures of the building. He married Deborah Woolsey, whose family were natives of New Jersey, here in Harford County. He married her here in Harford County in 1799. They had one known daughter, Harriet, who married Dr. Parker Forward. He served as a private in the 40th Regiment during the War of 1812 and later in the 7th Cavalry from, for one day in August of 1814. Later, he became the sheriff of Harford County from 1816 to 1819 and later ran for surveyor of Harford County in 1831. The next residence that we come to is John Brown and Mrs. Rogers' home, lot number 28. This is next uh, to the left is Israel Malsby's home, and to the right is the two lots that the Bradford family has. There's no pictures of this building. It's just that this house resided on that area of Main Street. The next residence that we come to is the residence of John Riordan, who owned lot number 11. This was on the northwest corner of Main and Office Streets. He bought the lot in 1791 and also had a frame structure. Later became a frame structure that William Herman demolished in 1867 to build a brick structure, which is there today, which is the Legg Mason building uh, there at the corner of Main and Office Streets. John Riordan was postmaster at Bel Air from 1794 until 1819. He had two children, James and Margaret. Margaret married Robert Richardson, who was a mercantile business owner with Samuel Richardson, who I just spoke of. The next lot is the Bradford family home, which was next to John Brown and Mrs. Rogers' house to the left, and to the right was the other lot owned by Jason Moore. This house, owned by Samuel Bradford, born in 1774, died in 1849, married Jane Bond. They had two known children, uh, Gustavus Williamson Bradford, who later became the governor of Maryland from 1862 to 1866, and Charles Bradford. Samuel Bradford also served in the War of 1812, and when he died in 1849, him and his wife were later interred at Greenmount Cemetery in Baltimore. This house is no longer there. Um, this would have been on the same side of what today is the sheriff's office, uh, around where Cortland Hardware was when it was at its old location. The next residence was that of Dr. Montgomery. Dr. Montgomery lived next to John Riordan in lot number 10. Born in 1789, dies in 1878. His wife Caroline lived to 1865, and they had three children. There are no pictures of this residence, just that it was between John Riordan's house and where Richard and where Robinson's had their store, which Robinson's store was right next to where the courthouse is today. The next residence was lot number 34, owned by which was Stephen Jones's Inn. married a lady named Mary Taylor in 1808, and they had three children. Mary Ann Elizabeth Jones, who was wife of Abram Lingling Jarrett, who was the clerk of the court and later the comptroller of Maryland during the Civil War under Thomas Holliday Hicks, who was the governor of Maryland during the first half of the Civil War. Also, a daughter Sally and a son William. He also had a sister Cassandra who married Michael McKinnihay, who also owned another lot here in town on Main Street. The Jones family was later buried at their family farm, which is present day down Emerton Road on the same side near where the Bel Air Firehouse Station number 3 is, down in that vicinity. The next building we came to was lot number 33. This was Joseph Robinson's store. He had a residence and a store in the same building. What is also known of him is he had a son, John, who was a bachelor at the time that Mrs. Rogers wrote this information. Nothing further is known about what happened to Mr. Robinson or his son. The next building was lot number 24, owned by Michael McConaughey. As I addressed before, his wife Cassandra was the sister of Stephen Jones, and he had two sons, James and William. There's no pictures of this home that we're aware of. The next item was Richardson's store, which was lot number 8. Richardson's store was on the other side of Main Street, next to the courthouse at the corner of Office Street and Main Street. This was a general mercantile store called R. Richardson and Company, owned by Robert Richardson. In 1825, it was owned by Little Juan, who was a general mercantile store. Later in 1833, by William Ferry, who was a butcher. Then by George W. and Larkin Davis in 1834 by McCormick and Martin. Later by Samuel Richardson in 1838, and finally in 1855 by N.B. Holland, who owned a dry goods business. The next item that we come to is lot number 7. This was owned by Thomas Magnus. This was also the building of the Bond of Union office, which he purchased from Buckler and Joshua S. Bond in 1807. Then Thomas Magnus sold the lot to Thomas Hayes in 1813 after Thomas Hayes came to Bel Air. In lot number 22, Thomas Hayes owned a store. It is unclear what type of store he owned. Uh, the only evidence that we have is that he actually owned a store, which was uh, to the left was Michael McConaughey's home, and to the right was what we've referred to as the Stone House. Next to Thomas Hayes' store was the Stone House, which was lot number 21. There's no pictures of this house or who actually owned it. As we go down Pennsylvania Avenue, that is where the Bel Air Academy was at 24 East Pennsylvania Avenue, which is still there today. Was built in 1814, right after Thomas Hayes came here to Bel Air a year after. The first headmaster was the Reverend Reuben Davis. The house, the academy later merged with the Bel Air Grade School in 1888, continued as a house in primary grades until 1900, when it was sold to J. Robert Ayres, who remodeled the house as a private residence, and that's basically like it stayed for a while and later as a business. Was owned by the late Alan Anderson, who was a photographer. As we walk down Main Street, we come to the lot number 19, which was owned by the McClellan heirs. The heirs of Dr. McClellan in 1814 owned a two-story, 24 by 18-foot, one-story log house. Also, I'm sorry, 27 by 18 two-story house, and one-story log 18 by 29 house, a kitchen, a stone stable, valued at $2,000. The stone portion of the building was in place in 1814. In 1817, Thomas Hayes acquired the property, and it would later stay in the Hayes Jacobs family until 1950. The next lot that we came to was lot number 18, which was owned by Israel Bowman. He was the husband of Elizabeth Day, who he married in 1801. Israel was a captain in the War of 1812 in the 40th Regiment. In 1813, where he was stationed at Wilmer's Landing, which was commanded by Captain John Smithson. Israel Bowman died in October of 1814. According to his accounts, his wife Elizabeth uh, appointed two others, Jason Moore, who was also a resident there in town, and John McKinney, who was also there as well. Nothing else was known about him after that. And there's no pictures of that residence. As we walk across the street from where McLennan's home was that of the Methodist Church. And as the Methodist graveyard was stuck in the back of the church, which was lot number 3. On the left, you have the Methodist Church, and on the right is the graveyard, which sat in the back of the church until the 1950s when it was removed. The stones were removed and placed at Mount Carmel Methodist Church, which is in Emerton, Maryland. This is another picture here of Main Street in the same location. Lot number 1 was Vincent Jeffrey's home. That today, that home is actually still standing. That is now law offices, a little blue building. As you go down Main Street today, this house would be on your left hand side. These were the way the maps of Bel Air were compiled, which were actually found in the land record books at the courthouse as Bel Air increased its uh, the town outward past Jeffrey's home, as well as some of the other owners over periods of time. Uh, the amount of building lots and stuff that Thomas Hayes went and purchased over time that we were able to document. This is another shot, a blow up of how much Thomas Hayes actually purchased there in town. You can also see where Henry Dorsey also purchased some additional lots after the 1815 uh, writing was done. There's also some other families involved as well, in addition to uh, the ones that I spoke of. And this is from the 1858 map, some 40 some years after Mrs. Rogers did her writing of how Bel Air looked and the families that lived there some 40 years after. And as you can see, on the far right, the Hayes family still has the uh, the Hayes house, and as you go up Main Street, there's the graveyard on the same side of the street, as well as Jeffrey's house and the other remaining of the families that lived there some 40 years after the fact of when the letter was written. And that is all.
Thanks, Chris. I've got a couple of questions that are sort of came up after we have after listening to you, but I want to remind folks that since we are recording the event in advance, we're not going to be able to take their questions today. If you'd like to submit a question for Chris, you may do so using the contact feature on the web page of the Historical Society of Harford County, www.harfordhistory.org, and just early in the message note that it's about the Thomas Hayes talk so that it'll be given to Chris to answer. I do have a couple of questions of my own. What do we know about the Hayes household itself? You talked about who the spouse and children were of many of the people who lived along Main Street. What do we know about Thomas Hayes himself?
Thomas Hayes himself, at that time when he comes to Bel Air, he does have a few children. He later, a few of his children are very, very young at the time. Um, there's a couple of them there. There were several of them that were born uh, while after he's purchased the Hayes house there in Bel Air into the the later part of the 18 teens into the 1820s um, there at the Hayes house.
Okay. Um, now, um, you have you talked about the cemetery being moved. Can you talk a little bit more about the cemetery being moved and what were the events that surrounded that happening?
Uh, my understanding about the cemetery being moved, this was done in the 1950s. Um, the There were several graves that were in the back of the Methodist Church, which was on Main Street, which was lot number 3. And when the church, after the church was deciding to move, um, they later moved the bodies, moved the stones. I'm not aware if they moved the bodies or not, because there was an expansion that they wanted to do with I believe, the Sunday school. What I've been told. Um, so they moved the stones to the present day Mount Carmel Church, which is down Emerton Road area, and that's where they are today.
Now, Mount Carmel Church, for those who are listening, is at the corner of Emerton Road and Wheel Road. It's a little stone church. Um, so now, okay, those are the questions that came to my mind as I was listening to you. Um, So let me just, if you'll move to the next slide, we hope that you, our audience, have enjoyed this presentation about the people who lived in Bel Air in the 19th century during the time of Thomas Hayes. And I want to thank you, Chris, on behalf of our attendees, our viewers, and the Historical Society of Harford County. For our listeners, the Historical Society publishes the Harford Historical Bulletin. And in issue number 25, is devoted largely to the Hayes House history and the actual moving of the Hayes House, which took place, as Chris said, in the mid 20th century. There are also several books for sale that are related to the history of Bel Air. Some of those, I think, deal as much with 20th century Bel Air history as they do with earlier periods. If you've enjoyed this presentation, please consider making a donation or becoming a member of the Historical Society. You can visit our website at www.harfordhistory.org. Our next virtual event is on Tuesday, August the 10th at 12:30 p.m. Mariana Skoronsky, the director of the Historical Society, will give an illustrated presentation on the life of Harvey Ledoux, from his boyhood in New York City to his years on Long Island through his final years in Harford County and the creation of his lovely garden outside Jarrettsville. The 1-hour presentation is free. Reserve your ticket today at the Society's website. On the website, you'll find a list of coming events, more about the history of Harford County, and instructions for joining the Society. That web address again is www.harfordhistory.org. Thank you for joining us, and come back for another event.